Welcome to Pirate Living Podcast. We are your hosts, Karan and Kristen. On this podcast, we are highlighting ordinary people living extraordinary lives. These are pirates who take small, bold actions daily to create social change. Pirate life is all about rebelling and breaking the rules for good. Creating lasting social change starts by first breaking our inner rules. After all, the hardest rules to break are your own. The pirates we highlight have dedicated themselves to creating good trouble.
Today we are talking with Kaylee Grace. Kaylee Grace is an emotional trauma recovery coach and host of the podcast Love Creates Freedom. She has experienced a lot of hardship in her life and spent 10 years trying to heal from her trauma through positive thinking and other methods, but nothing seemed to work. Eventually, she realized that she needed to do the real work of healing, which involved facing her trauma head on. This is a difficult process, but it was ultimately very rewarding. And Kaylee is now sharing her story to inspire and help other people who are struggling with trauma. And Kaylee, we're happy to have you here talking with us today.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. And good morning to you. Yeah, before we hit record, we told you we like to have Google AI write a little poem about our guests. And so would you like to hear what Google came up with for you?
I'm not sure, but sure, let's go.
It's getting a little bit better at doing rhymes, but all right. Here we go. Kaylee Grace, a name that rings a bell, a woman of strength, a woman of hell. She's been through it all, but she always comes out tall. She's a survivor, a fighter, a true rebel. She's not afraid to speak her mind. She's not afraid to stand up for what she believes in. She's not afraid to fight for what's right. She's a true inspiration, a role model for us all, a true pirate. So here's to Kaylee Grace, a woman who's changing the world, one small, bold action at a time. Thank you for being you. So that is your
AI
poem.
apparently knows me better than I do.
Google's a fan.
It is. And I liked how it started off rhyming. Like the first little stanza was a rhyme.
Yeah,
And then it went to like free form after that.
Yeah. I have to apologize if you can hear a rooster. I don't know if you can hear a rooster crowing in the background.
A little bit, not too bad.
Okay, yeah. We've got one in the bathroom, so he might get a bit loud.
In the
bathroom?
Yeah, he's been sick, so he's been in the bathroom for the last month.
Oh.
Our bathroom is revolting. I would never recommend to anyone to have a rooster living in your bathroom 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Doesn't sound ideal.
It's not, but this is apparently the life I chose, and every day I sit there and I go, what was I thinking? But here we are.
Well, speaking of the life you chose, we'd love for you to take us on a journey of your pirate tale. Tell us about your life and what led you to where you are now today.
I will try and keep it short, because
Okay.
the more I dive in deep, the more I look and the more I realize how much there actually is. It's weird. It was just yesterday I came to this realization, because I have had issues physically with being intimate with men, and I have been racking my brain trying to figure out how I can have symptoms of someone that has been sexually abused but never actually have been sexually abused. But then I realized that my dad used to hit me a lot. Growing up, I never fitted in the box. I was that kid that always talked back, or that always said no, and I always got hit for it. And I realized that punishment created this feeling of just not being safe in my physical body, not being safe as a female, not being safe around men, realizing that men have this incredible dominance over me that I don't know what to do with. And if I go from that and then go backwards, my life has kind of been filled with just a lot of emotional and physical trauma. Like I said, my dad used to hit me. My mom was unfortunately an alcoholic. One of my siblings was my biggest bully, although if you had a conversation with that person, they would say I was their biggest bully. So that goes both ways. And I just, from the emotional trauma that I went through, I ended up really finding myself in the darkest place after my mum passed away, realizing that my entire life she was my foundation. So I didn't have a foundation. I didn't have a foundation of love and safety and trust, which most people do, or a lot of people do. But for those of us that don't, that weren't raised with that foundation because we were punished so much, I realized that after my mum passed, I had no foundation. There was nothing underneath me. There was no love. There was no safety. It's kind of like she was my dealer. I was addicted to her. I was addicted to how she made me feel. I was addicted to the criticism, the judgment, the manipulation, and none of this was her fault. She was exactly like I am, a product of her upbringing. She was abused emotionally. I don't know if she was abused physically because we never had that conversation, but I know she was abused emotionally, and she was abused a lot. And when you end up being someone that is raised to believe that your entire being is unwanted, that it's not, what's the best word? It's basically a punishable offense. So I really found myself in this position in my 40s, looking at myself going, my entire existence is a reason to be punished. There's no part of me that actually thinks I should be here. There's no part that thinks I deserve to be here, that I'm meant to be here. I shouldn't be here. Every person in my life has punished me in one way, shape, or form. And it has been my own personal journey through hell, really, of waking up in the morning feeling like my life is a punishable offense, and then going through the entire day feeling that way, and then going to sleep feeling that way, and then waking up during the night in panic attacks and just in utter fear of being asleep, just in case something went wrong while I was asleep and I didn't wake up. And it was just this constant, and this didn't just start in my 40s. This has been happening, I think, since I took drugs when I was 19. That was kind of the first trigger for the unraveling of the panic attacks. So my panic attacks started when I was 19 and went all the way through my 20s and 30s. But I opened the door to looking at my stuff in my 30s. And then in my 40s, it's like the universe went, well, you've kind of been looking at the onion layers, like you've been peeling them off, and it's been really nice, and it's been really gentle, and you've been doing all your affirmations and law of attraction and manifesting, and you've created all of this, and it's all happy days and rainbows and unicorns. And then it went, so we're kind of going to just like rip everything out from underneath you and just leave you lying raw and naked and crucified on the ground, face down in the mud, just with nothing. And now you get to build yourself back up again. And that has kind of been my last almost 9 years, 8.5 years of my life, is figuring out how do I come back from this hell that I've landed myself in. And it has been horrible. I wouldn't recommend it for anybody. But now that I'm on the other side of my deepest, darkest fear, it is better. There are still moments that are hard, but they're moments. It's not the whole entire day anymore. It's moments throughout the day, maybe, but it's not all day. So I'm thankful to be on the other side of that, my own personal hell. So that's like a snippet into my life.
You mentioned just that feeling that your existence was like punishable. And you mentioned panic attacks. How else did that manifest throughout your life? Like how did that belief affect you up until you were like in your 40s?
So every friend that I've ever had has ended their friendship with me, to the point where even my two best friends of over 10 years, who were the godparents to my daughter, they ended their friendship with me 2 weeks before my mum passed away. And it's just this constant series of me building friendship with someone and then them leaving. And that comes back to my sibling. So my sibling actually stopped talking to me when I was 12, and I'm now 47, and they still have not had a conversation. Like, I have had the silent treatment for what, 30 something years. And that moment in time, especially because my mom and my dad actually enabled it. So they were, at no time did they say, okay, you need to stop this. You need to, like, they never parented up. They never said, you need to stop doing this. This is actually not okay. They looked at me and said, well, this is your fault. You did this. I was 12. When I look back and I look at a 12-year-old and I go, there's no, I think a 12-year-old didn't do that. Parents did that. And so from that moment, and then also really believing, because then I ended up alone with my mom throughout my teenage years. And that's when her alcoholism really kicked in, was when this person moved out to go and live with my dad. And so I grew up, I spent my really strong teenage years just in a lot of emotional abuse. My mom and I would scream at each other all the time. So how it manifested is that if I have a look at my life now, we live on 140 acres in almost the middle of nowhere, in complete isolation. And people look at that and go, oh my God, you're living the life. And I go, no, I'm not. Every moment of my life has meant that I have made choices out of fear instead of love, trust, and safety. And every decision that I've made has brought us to this position where my daughter has no friends because I fear going out and being around people. I'm afraid of what they can do to me. I'm afraid of the power that they have over my emotions. I'm afraid of the damage that they can do to me, because people can tend to be assholes. And if you don't live within the box that they want you to live in, then they will reject you in a second. And the whole of that has put me in this position where it's really challenging to be around people. Although now that I know that the choices that I've made were out of fear, now that I know that, it's interesting because the next door neighbor in the place we're at now, he had been making really inappropriate sexual advances towards me and making sexual comments towards me in front of my daughter. And I was really uncomfortable with it. And I sent him a message and I said, look, you either need to stop doing it or I need to limit contact. And I haven't heard from him since. And it was interesting because it started to bring up this, oh my God, another person that I thought was a friend has stopped talking to me. Another person, I didn't fit into the box. And all of a sudden they've rejected me. And as I was feeling all of this, I was sitting there looking at it going, you know what? It's okay that somebody has rejected me. It's okay for me to feel safe, even though somebody has rejected me. So the work I've had to do is to counteract the fear around people and creating safety for myself. So many years ago, when I was sitting on my driveway, I remember sitting there and saying to myself, in this moment right now, I could maybe perhaps potentially consider in some roundabout kind of sort of way, sometime in the near distant way future, actually contemplate comprehending feeling safe. Like, safety was so far away from me. I couldn't even comprehend that I could feel safe, but I could potentially comprehend maybe. It was like just this very round circle. But now, after the work that I've done, as I sit here, I can actually sit here and I can say, in this moment right now, I feel completely safe from harm. And I feel completely safe in myself. And that's kind of been the outcome of all the trauma, was just being completely afraid. And I guess that's where the panic attacks came from. Was, to me, panic attacks come because you don't feel safe. And the lack of friendships come because you don't feel safe. and the end of partnerships come because you don't feel safe. So here I am living with my daughter, completely isolated and alone, which is why my house is on the market, because I realized that I made all of these choices out of fear. And I don't want to live out of fear anymore. I don't want the fear to be the reason why I do things. I want to be doing things based on how I feel from a space of safety and love and trust. And it's a completely different experience. Had I done all of that all the way along, my life would be completely different. But I can see all these moments in time where there was a crossroad, where it was his safety, love, and trust, and his fear. And I can see the choices, the two choices that I had, and I can see how I chose fear every time.
And that, like what you're saying too, within your story, are all these choices of what looked like the right thing to do in the healing process too, of like doing that deep inner work, and then but on the other side of that, like even though it felt like it was all the right choices, you've now realizing like, oh no, I was making these choices because of fear, and now I know that, and now I can make these choices from that place of safety. And yeah, I'd love to hear too a little bit more about like that process of really truly like how it was that you were doing the trauma, like the work, as people the working quotes, but yeah, doing that inner work, and into now as well. Like you said, your house is on the market and you're starting to make choices from safety. So what did that transition look like for you? And yeah, what other choices are you making for yourself now to say, like, to prove to yourself, I am safe. These are choices that I'm making for me.
There are a couple of little examples. So for me, I look for these small, minute changes. I don't necessarily look for my entire world to be completely different. And now all of a sudden I'm surrounded by friends and I have a partner, and I do not look at it from a big picture perspective. I really look at it from a small perspective. And it's the small things that I look at and I take lessons from, but also realize how far I've come. So one example was, there was someone that was living on my property and she was constantly punishing me, like everybody in my life has done. She was the epitome of that human being that I had in my space for years. And I really struggled with it. And but I didn't say anything. I was too afraid. I was making choices out of fear. I was too afraid she was going to leave. I was too afraid she was going to reject me. I was too afraid that she was going to react to something that I said in a negative way, and it was going to create animosity and friction and tension and all of these stories that were coming up. And then one day I was walking through my lounge room and I just stopped because I kept rolling around in my head for days. Why is she punishing me? I'm not doing anything wrong. Why is she punishing me? Why is she punishing me? And it just dropped in my head. And I heard this voice say, why are you punishing yourself? And it stopped me in my tracks and it dropped. So sometimes you get things in your head, but then sometimes it drops into your physical body. And I felt it on such a visceral level. And I went, holy crap, she's punishing me because I'm punishing me. It's like this voice just said, yeah, basic law of attraction. Come on, you know this stuff. Whatever you are vibrating is exactly what you're going to create. And it's like, oh, this is why everybody's punishing me. Because we're kind of this whole, we are how we were raised. So I was raised to believe that I was punishable. But at some point, we actually get to this moment where we get to put our big girl knickers on and we get to become adults and we get to go, you know what, this doesn't actually have to be my reality. I don't have to live this way anymore. I don't actually have to live from a space where, even though I am a product of my upbringing, that doesn't mean that damage has to stay with me for the rest of time. And it was kind of all of this came through in this one moment where I stood there and I went, I don't have to punish myself anymore. I don't have to hold on to that story. Up until that moment, there was a part of me that thought I did. There was a part of me that thought I did have to hold on to that story because that was my life. That was my trauma. That was my upbringing. That was my program. That was my story. And there was this part of me that really identified with it and went, this is how I'm meant to live my life. I'm meant to punish myself. And within a second of realizing I don't have to punish myself anymore, all of a sudden it's like no one in this world can ever punish me again because I don't have to punish myself anymore. And the next day I had the example of how that moment changed me, because we went to the post office to pick something up and they started having a go at me because they left a message on my phone and they were really going at me. And usually I would take it and I would just go, yeah, okay. And I wouldn't say anything and I would just squash everything down and I'd go home and then I'd just, it would just go in my brain and I would think about it and think about it and think about all the different things I could have said and all the different things I should have said and all the different ways I could have handled it, but I didn't do it. Another reason to punish myself, right? But I didn't do any of that. I stood there and I looked at them and I said, you are punishing me for something that is actually not my fault. You are responsible for what has happened. And I'm not going to let you stand here and punish me for something that is actually not my fault. And as these words were coming out of my mouth, there's another part of me that's looking, going, where is this? Who is this? Where is this coming from? And it's all of these small moments. And I don't know if this is answering your question. If it's not, feel free to jump in and say, yeah, that doesn't really answer our question. But it's all of these small moments. And it's like saying to my next door neighbor, this is what you're doing to me. This is how I feel about what you're doing to me. And I'm actually not okay with it. And then hearing that part of me go, it's okay for him to reject you. That's not on you. That's on him. It's okay. You don't need to punish yourself. And what I realized was all of the fear and the lack of safety and the lack of trust and this feeling that I woke up with every minute of every day, and it just carried with me were two things: punishment and safety. Just not feeling safe. And punishing myself because I didn't feel safe. And it's like every minute of every day, it made sense to punish myself. Because especially when I became aware of the law of attraction and all of a sudden I became aware of creating my reality, it's like understanding that I create my reality gave this punishing voice inside of me a megaphone and said, hey, yeah, now let's validate how much you should punish yourself, because look how much you're look at how bad of a life you are creating. Look at how shit your life is. You're creating this. So now we get to punish you for it. And it's like, sometimes I'd sit there and think, I would rather go back into not knowing and not creating and not just complete unawareness. Like take back the pill. Can I throw it back up, please, and give it back to you? And can I just go and get a job? And can I just have a meaningless relationship and have children and have mortgages and house insurance and car insurance? Can I just have that normal life that everyone around me seems to have and be completely oblivious to how wrong my life is and be completely oblivious to how far away I am from living the life that I actually want to live? That sounds great. But it just wasn't on the cards for me. So instead, I got to feel like crap every minute of every day. Until I get to this point, which has only been recently, until I get to this point where I really start to understand. And even though I knew this, I'm understanding this more on a visceral level, that my feelings are my guide. That if I feel like crap, the program was from the punishment, but it's a habit now. And I've broken the program, but if I'm still in the habit of feeling bad all day, then I'm going to stay there. Whereas what I really get, and it's interesting, I was listening to Abraham this morning, and I really wanted to share this with you. Abraham Hicks and Esther shared this analogy that just, it hit me so deep. And I'm like, oh my God, I understand now. Is that your emotions are like a trampoline. And because the woman had asked, how can I stop feeling bad about myself? And Abraham said, but why would you want to stop that? Because if you understand that emotions are like a trampoline, to go up, you have to come down. But if you realize that to go up, you have to come down. When you're down, you go, hey, this is awesome. What a ride. When am I going back up again? And it becomes this fun ride because you realize that you're down. Well, you don't have to hold on to it. Breathe through it. Feel it. Just let it, like where people say let it go, I didn't really understand that concept, honestly, until this morning. And it was only a couple of hours ago that I understood this concept, because I was standing in the kitchen and I woke up feeling this feeling, just feeling this tug and feeling this feeling. And I went, I can't spend my days feeling this. Like, I cannot spend today feeling this feeling. This is not what I want to feel. So I stopped, and where my brain would usually start to go down the punishment, then I would pull it back, and then I'd go into a space and I would hold myself in that space and I would feel the feeling and I would sit with the feeling, and it would dissipate eventually because I'd be sitting there in that space and holding myself in it. I looked at it, I breathed into it, and that's all I did was I just breathed into it. I didn't think about it. I didn't analyze it. I didn't look for the story. I didn't look for the pattern. I didn't look for any reason. I didn't create a reason for why it was there. I stood there, I breathed into it, and then it just went within about 5 seconds. And I looked and I went, oh my God, this is what letting go is. This is exactly what letting go is. It's not analyzing it. It's not wondering what the story is or the pattern or where it came from or any of those things. It's simply just not even picking it up. And that's really what I got today, which is weird, but I'm so glad that I got it this morning, is that letting go is not actually picking it up. Don't pick up the feeling in the first place. Don't think about it. Don't think you're wrong for it. And if you are thinking you're wrong for it, then there's still work to do. And that's what I really got this morning, was I've come to this point in my journey where I've dropped the punishment. I feel safety. I'm building up my trust. And I'm able to stand here now and have an emotion that I do not want to have. Realize I don't have to pick it up. I don't have to create a story around it or figure out it came from my mom, it came from my dad, it came from my sibling, it came from wherever it came from. This whole analysis of the emotion, I just didn't touch it. I felt it, breathed into it, and it disappeared. It's like, oh, is this how easy it's supposed to be? And then I get this resounding, yes, yes. This is what we have been trying to get you to do for 17 years, is to realize that you don't have to analyze the crap out of yourself. You don't have to go through all of that deep trauma work to get to this point. You did, but then I resisted every minute of every day of the universe trying to get me to here. And I have been known in the past when people have said to me, why is this so hard for you? And I said, because I just sit in so much resistance. It's like the universe has me by the toe and it's dragging me along the sand. And I'm like, no, I don't want to go. I don't want to realize what I have to realize. I just want to stay in my own personal health. So I don't know if that answered your question, but that is my very long blurb of sharing more information with you.
Yeah, no, it did. It answered the question, and there was so much along the way too. So many things that like resonated, first of all, too, with the like going along with certain feelings, because for me it was people pleasing, like, oh, I got to be the good girl, I got to behave this certain way, and so I would go along with what people would do or say or fit into that box they wanted me to be in. And then, but the part with the emotions too, like, oh, you don't have to create a story around it, because I mean, as humans, we like to create stories as well, but like that is such a thing. Like, oh, I feel this way because of this, because as a child, like my older brother beat up on me, and so now I'm scared of when these things happen and I don't feel safe, or Like there's an emotion and it's there and I can feel it or I can analyze why it's there. So that really, I really loved that part of like what you learn from that too. And like you don't have to pick up a story with the emotion and hold on to it and look at it from all angles. You can just say, I'm feeling this, acknowledge it's there, and then let it pass. So.
It was interesting. It wasn't even for me like consciously saying I'm feeling this. It was noticing that because I'm changing my wording around calling it a feeling and I'm shifting it to calling it a sensation. Because then for me, by calling it a sensation, I'm actually not even labeling it as a feeling. So it doesn't, because then my brain wants to go, well, what feeling is it? Is it anger? Is it sadness? Is it resentment? Is it hate? Are you happy? Are you sad? All of it. And then the punishment comes in and goes, well, you're feeling all of this and you shouldn't be. You're not feeling what you should be. So let's just punish you from very many different angles. And now when you come into this position of being able to see what the brain does and how much it wants to keep you where you were, then for me now, this morning, my whole thing was and I know I use the term feeling, but if I get into it a bit deeper and a bit clearer, it was I feel this sensation. Okay. And that's as far as I go now. That's as far as I went this morning. I realize now as I'm telling you, I didn't actually want to identify it as a feeling, because then that creates this whole new set of crap that wants to come up. That doesn't have to come up. And that has also been a really big realization for me over the last couple of weeks. I don't actually have to go into it. I don't have to pick it up. I thought I did have to pick it up. There's so much out there online that says, what are you feeling? What are you feeling? What are you feeling? What are you feeling? Identify your feelings, get to know your feelings. And now I'm at this point where I'm like, I don't want to pick them up. I want to go, the feeling that I have, or the sensation that I have when I'm not picking up my feelings, is just so much, it just is. It's like this clear, clean energy inside of me. It's not up, it's not down, it's not hard, it's not soft. It's just this really, really clean space of nothingness that I really enjoy spending time in. It's like I'm not picking anything up. And if I'm not picking anything up, then there's nothing going on. And if there's nothing going on, then I'm not feeling anything. And it's not numbness. It's not that numbness that's quite gray. It's a space that's filled with color, but there's nothing there. And it's nice and it's simple and it's calm and it's relaxed and it's just nice.
One of the things that you're talking about, just that story with your neighbor, and it sounded like to me that you were just creating appropriate boundaries with your neighbor, with those unwanted advances that he was making towards you. How have you noticed just that ability to grow, and as you practice creating those boundaries, have they become easier for you? Tell me about that.
I think he's kind of the first person that I've really anchored in such a strong boundary with. I've seen other experiences where I've kind of gone, okay, I'm making the choice not to put a boundary here, because if I put a boundary here, I know it's going to create something that I actually do not want to participate in. So instead of putting in a boundary, and I might distance myself, but this is someone that lives right next door. But yeah, it's interesting. it's interesting because the term boundary makes me feel really uncomfortable. And now I'm sitting here going, God, now I need to go and have a look and see why I feel uncomfortable using the term boundary. But it is, yeah, it's weird. It's weird because my whole dynamic with relationships growing up has been, and I wrote a Facebook post about it yesterday, I think, or the day before, that my intimate relationships was a series of me knowing I wanted to say no, but never actually said no. And I have to be really careful about the words that I use because my daughter's just come out of the bedroom, so I don't want to say anything too detailed right now. She's out of the bedroom, but I will when she goes back in. Yeah, and it was definitely creating a boundary, and the reaction has been something that I've had to be really careful with myself for. I've had to be really gentle with myself because there is such an opportunity for me to punish myself now and to go, see, you should never have done that. You should have just let him say what he was saying and just laughed it off and walked away. But this was in a time when I didn't feel safe setting boundaries. I didn't feel safe saying no. And yeah, so now that she's gone into the bedroom, so it was interesting because the post that I wrote was essentially around how I have so many different presentations of how I in intimate relationships with men, it seems like I have been sexually abused. It seems like I have been raped or forced into sex. Like the sex for me has always been excruciatingly painful, like excruciating. It's been, which is why I stopped doing it. It was just always excruciatingly painful. And now that I look back and now that I feel into it, I understand that the punishment that I received from my dad, the physical abuse that I received from him, the hitting me constantly, it created this utter fear around that dominance around men and men's ability to do whatever they want to my physical body. And I can't say no. I don't have a choice to say no. And at least I didn't believe I had a choice to say no. There was like that underlying thread of, you can't say no to what your dad is doing to you. What are you going to do? You're like 7 and he's hitting you. What are you going to do? You've got nothing. You're 8 and he's hitting you. What are you going to do? You've got nothing. You've got no recourse. I can't fight back. I'm not strong enough. I can't run away. He'll just catch me. So there was always this, I can't say no. And so when I started having sex with men, and then, daddy issues, having sex with lots of men, and it was always hurting, I realized that even though a man hasn't raped me, I have raped me. I did it, even though I knew I didn't want to. I forced myself to do something I knew I didn't want to do because I didn't know I could say no. And I didn't think I could say no. I didn't believe I could say no. And this is something like really it only happened with next door. It's like last week. So this whole thing is like, this is real time raw for me because I only had that realization about how much I had not said no and how much I use rape is such a brutal word, but it does kind of feel like that at the moment. So I sit in that space of that's kind of how it feels right now, that's kind of what it feels like I did to myself. And yeah, I don't know how this is all going to unravel and unfold, but I know that the start is saying no to someone and saying no to a man who towers over me. He's really tall and he's strong and he could pin me and like squash me like a bug and I'd have nothing. So to say no to him and to have him in such close proximity, he's my next door neighbor, and say no to him when he is sexually inappropriate towards me is also a big, it's a big thing. So I'm feeling a lot of that fear that I have come up, that unresolved fear around being in relationship with men, but also not trusting them, not feeling safe with them, and then also reminding myself that not every female feels this way. Another female who lived here that may have had the same position with the next door neighbor, she might go and say, hey, that's not okay, and not have fear come up. So I know that this is mine. I know that this is my story. I know that this is my trauma around this specific topic, because I know that another woman, someone else who hasn't gone through my life, wouldn't think anything about saying no to someone and setting that boundary, and not being afraid that he was then going to turn around and retaliate on her physical body, because she's never had that kind of story back it up. She hasn't had that validation in her past. So it's I want to say weird, but it's real and it's raw, and it's, for whatever reason, thanks universe, apparently I have to deal with all of this right now. So it's not that I haven't dealt with enough. It's not that I haven't already gone through my own personal hell of losing my mom, and then losing my life, and then having my eating disorder, and going through all of that as a single mom, and going through all of the trauma, like all the really deep levels of trauma I've been through. Now I have to face all the sexual abuse I put myself through. It's like,
Yeah.
okay.
I mean, I can only imagine growing up without like agency over your body, right? Like you had no agency, and now trying to assert those boundaries, and understanding that you do have that agency, but what does that actually look and feel like in practice, right?
Yeah.
And that's the and you say probably most women or some women wouldn't even be fearful. I mean, I think it's unfortunately a thing that does plague so many women, is just that loss of agency over our own body. I mean, far too many of us have gone through, sexual trauma. I can't even remember what the stats are now. I don't know, 8 out of 10. I don't know, just making it up. But
if I go by my podcast, of every woman that I've interviewed, I'm the only one that hasn't had sexual abuse as a child. And I've interviewed, let's say there are 30 women. I'm the only one that hasn't been sexually abused as a child. Everyone that I've spoken to has.
Yeah. And
it's always come up in the conversation. It blows me away.
Yeah. And it doesn't even have to be like full-blown abuse. I mean, as a woman, think about the first time that you were like walking down the street and you got like catcalled by someone. Like, I'm gonna guess that was like 12. You know what I mean? I know for me, it was very young. And all of that is that removing that agency. And you had that, unfortunately, you've had it even to a greater degree. So learning to set those boundaries and have that agency over your body, like that must it must bring a lot of fear along with it.
It's uncomfortable. As I'm sitting here talking to you, it's uncomfortable. I can feel it.
Yeah.
It's really uncomfortable. It's an uncomfortable feeling, but it also underneath the uncomfortable, which is kind of starting to give me a bit of strength to face it, because I haven't wanted to face it. I knew I had this problem in my 30s. I knew that it was an emotional reason that was causing the pain. This is back when I was doing the very nice, simple onion layer stuff. And I knew this was going to come up. And this sort of the last 8 years has really been about facing the deepest, darkest stuff that is hard. And this is part of it. Like everything that I've had to deal with in the last 8 years has been the rawest pain, the rawest hurts. There's no surface level stuff. It's not like I'm sitting on the surface and I'm able to say an affirmation and all of a sudden feel amazing. There are no affirmations like that do it for me. This has been raw and it's been dark. And I've said a few times that I don't believe it's a dark night of the soul. And I think whoever came up with that term has no idea what it feels like to deal with their trauma and their shit, because it's not a night. It's day after day after day after day, and it lasts, for some of us, it can be decades while we're dealing with the dark stuff. But then I also look and I think some of us have to go into the darkest places, because there are going to be people that are coming out and that are trying to deal with their dark stuff and they don't know how. And if everyone's sitting on the light stuff, if everyone's sitting on the surface level, then who's going to hold the people that are dealing with their darkness? And it's ugly. It is ugly. There is nothing pleasant about this experience. It is ugly, and it's raw, and it's painful. And but once you face the darkest space, which I did, so my darkest place was death. And when I was at the height of my eating disorder, it was about 6 years ago, and Death came for a visit, and he was there for 7 days. And I was about that far away from dying. I had lost a lot of weight, and I wasn't eating, and I was really at the epitome of starving myself, thinking I was doing the right thing, thinking I was being healthy. But I sat a couple of months ago and I faced my deepest, darkest, scariest place, which was death. It was not only dying, but also leaving my daughter behind, leaving my dogs behind. Like, what's going to happen if I die? And I had to face that. I had to actually go and sit in that and go, yeah, what's going to happen if I die? And actually sit with that feeling and cried through that feeling. It was horrible to sit and realize your death and accept it and go, okay, this is my reality. This is going to happen. So, and that's kind of when having the feeling every minute of every day stopped. It was after I actually faced that. And I realized that was my deepest, darkest fear. And it's interesting because I've had people, as I've been sharing bits and pieces on Facebook, I've had people actually say, oh yeah, you've got to go to rock bottom and then you bounce back. And every time someone says that and I go, this is not rock bottom for me. I've done rock bottom. That was my rock bottom. So to somebody else, what I'm going through now might seem like rock bottom, but for me, I feel like I'm on my way up. But what I'm doing is I am dealing with some of the raw things that I now need to deal with as I'm coming out of hell. I don't feel like I'm going down. I feel like I'm coming out. I've already gone down. I've already hit rock bottom. I've already sat in the deepest, darkest space that I can possibly sit. And now I'm on my way out. And I want to help people who are on their way down, because it is scary, and it is, and I did it alone, and it is dark. And when you don't have anyone around you to hold you in that space, it's not easy. And I get that now what I'm facing is the sexual stuff, is the sexual abuse, is the being afraid of men. And that's this feeling that sits inside of me. This is the part that makes me feel uncomfortable being a female, makes me uncomfortable being a woman on this planet. It scares me being a woman because people have so much power over my physical body. But then underneath that, I can feel it's time to start doing something about that. It's time to start doing taekwondo or jiu-jitsu. Do something. Because we're raised in this environment where some of us really believe that we have no power. We have no power over our physical bodies, so we can't do anything about it. But if I could kick ass in jiu-jitsu and a man came up to me and touched me, I could kick his ass. All of a sudden I have power. And that for me has been a big change, because there was no part of me that actually thought that I could have power to face that if that was ever a problem. But now, as I'm talking to you and I look at it and I go, I'm itching to get into doing something physical. So if it ever happens to me, I can kick ass. I don't have to be a victim to that. But until I faced this, until I faced the punishment, until I faced setting up a boundary to that guy, I felt like I had to be a victim. That was my life. That was my story. And now I'm sitting here going, I don't have to be a victim to this. I can actually do something that fixes this problem. And that's where where I feel like I'm on the other side of the darkness, because coming down, I just felt like a victim. I was a victim. There was nothing I could do. I was a victim. Then all of a sudden I stepped out of the mud and I came out the other side. I faced my deepest, darkest fear and I came out the other side. And now all of a sudden no, I can do something to fix this. I can fix this. okay, here's the next thing. I can fix this. Okay, here's the next thing. I can face this and I can fix this. There are things I can do to support my physical body, to support my emotional body, and to support my energetic body. So I'm not a victim. And it's weird. I can hear this voice in my head saying, but you're not allowed to fix things. You're not a man. You're not meant to fix things. That's not on you. That's not on you. You're not allowed to fix things. But that's an old voice. That's part of what put me in the situation in the first place, with this whole matriarchal, the man is the fixer, the man is the hunter, the man is the one that goes out and gathers things, and women are meant to stay at home and nurture the kids and just submit and be subdued, and all of that stuff that comes from centuries ago of women not being allowed to stand up for themselves. It's only been recently that the women's movement have come through, and I don't believe in feminism. I'm not a fan of it or where it's going. But I sit in this place of, it's okay if I want to go and do something to be physically strong. It's okay if I want to physically take care of my body so I can beat the living snot out of somebody if they come towards me. It's okay for me to want to be able to do that. There's power in that situation. Whereas previously I didn't think there was. And so now I feel like I'm in such a better position. Now it's like, no, I want to be in this physical body, and I want to see what it can do. I want to see what it's capable of. I want to see how well it can protect me when I'm in harm's way, as opposed to how quickly it will run away when I'm in harm's way.
Yeah. And like what you were saying too, of like facing the dark, I've come across so many people that are like, I'm a light worker. This is what I do. And it's like, we all have light and dark. Like the goal is to figure out a balance between lightness and darkness. And if you're just feeling in the light, like how deep can you truly go? So yeah, it's hearing how you want to help people too, going through the depth of the darkness and actually looking into the dark, and not just, here, let's shine light, like some people like to do.
I did the light worker stuff. I have been there.
Yeah.
I was a light worker and a light healer, and then I did shadow work, and now I'm just here in the dark. But it's not dark. Like, there's so much light now, though. Once you get to that depth, once you hit that darkest point and you step out, it's like, oh, so there's darkness and there's light, and it just all is what it is. Mm-hmm. It's all that. And if you can sit in this position where, if we were to take away the words dark and light, why don't we just remove them? Why does there have to be darkness and light at all? Why can there not be, here we are? Why does it have to be dark and light? Why does it have to be good and bad? Why does it? And people say, oh, because if you don't know the bad, then you don't know the good. And it's like, yes, but what if it just is what it is? And we're simply on this trampoline of, oh, here's a sensation. I don't like that sensation. I'm going to feel the sensation. It's going to fizzle out, and then I'm going to be somewhere that I do like. What if it's simply this life of, I like this feeling, I don't like this feeling. I like this feeling, I don't like this feeling. I like I like this thing, I don't like this thing. And I'm playing with that at the moment. How can it just be that simple?
Yeah. Yeah. What if we're just humans living the human experience in this? And the easiest way to live it is to accept what is. Yeah. And what do you want to tell us about? Like, what are you doing with people to help them? You have a program, right?
I do. I am getting ready to launch a challenge. It's going to be a 5-day challenge, and I'm going to be doing them on a frequent basis because I want to help people get out of their panic attacks. The panic attacks was the first thing I needed to stop, because that was the most debilitating part for me in the moment. Like, the panic attacks, when you have them, they encompass everything. For me, I couldn't look at anything else until I looked at the panic attacks. But once I stopped those, and once I put those down, then all of a sudden the doors open. It's like, oh, okay, now that my entire life is not determined by the panic attacks, what's next? Then I was able to start working through what is next after the panic attacks. So I'm helping people with that. And then there's my podcast, which has been amazing because it has been people. When I was in the deepest, darkest place at the beginning of this year, I put a call out asking people who has been in the darkness, who has gone through trauma, who has been physically abused, and who is on the other side. That's how the podcast started. I needed help and I wanted support, but I wasn't in a position to pay for a coach. But I also had the realization that if I pay for a coach, then I'm only getting one person's perspective. And their perspective is going to be limited and narrow according to their life. And I realized, I went, I don't know if I want I don't know if I just want one perspective. I want to be able to have access to lots of perspectives. And so that's where I started the podcast. And that has been amazing. But that's what I needed because I was so narrow in my perspective. I was so limited that I needed to hear from lots of different people to get the permission to come out the other side. I needed to know that there was a light. I needed to know that the journey was okay. I needed to know that the journey was in some way normal, even though it was hard, it was still an element of normal. So it was funny. The podcast started because of my own limitation, because I was afraid of my own narrowness and my own limitations, that I created the podcast to undo my limited narrowness. It was just really bizarre. And then I also do one-on-ones with people. They're a rarity now because I prefer to do the groups and getting people working together and supporting each other and diving into the depths together. But I do still do one-on-ones sometimes.
And where can our listeners go to find out more then about your program and about you and the podcast and everything?
The podcast mostly is on YouTube, and if you put in Love Creates Freedom, it should come up. There's also my website, which is lovecreatesfreedom.com. And there's also Linktree, which has everything. So linktree.com/ I think it's under Kaylee Grace.
And we'll put it in the notes. Yeah,
that would be great. I will find it and I will message it to you. Again, Linktree has everything listed.
Yeah. We'll make sure, yes, they'll be in the notes. So check down below, check out the podcast. And Kaylee, we'd love for you too to do you have any or a recommendation for how our listeners could start what we call their own pirate life, to take their life into their own hands?
I think the biggest thing is to realize you don't have to be where you are. You don't have to live the life. If you're an adult and you're feeling things and you're living in a way that you don't want to live, you're doing that by choice. It doesn't feel like choice. But once you realize that you don't actually have to live that way and that it is a choice, because you are now an adult, you are a grown adult, you're not a child anymore, it opens up that, what if I don't have to live that way? And I think that would be the best question that people could ask if they're living a life that they don't want to live. What if I don't have to live this way? What if I don't have to do this? Because then that opens up a new channel of thought and different questioning. But we're so raised in our fears. And for a lot of us, we're children in adults' bodies. We really are. We didn't grow up. We're still children. And so it's really hard to put on the adult mindset and be responsible when you haven't learned how. And I guess the biggest thing I realized through all of this is I have had to learn. I've had to learn how to feel safe. I've had to learn how to stop punishing myself. I've had to learn how to connect to the universe. I've had to learn how to feel emotions. I've had to learn how to feel happy. I've had to learn how to feel joy. It's all a learning process. If you realize that you don't know how to do your life any differently because you haven't learned. So start asking, what if I don't have to live this way? And how can I learn to live life differently? That will that one thing will change. It might change that much, or it might change this much, but it will change.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for coming on and chatting with us today. I know it's early morning for you, but we really appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and for your vulnerability too, and sharing with us things as they were unfolding for you. It's a really great conversation.
Yeah, thank you. I didn't even know how that was going to come through, but here we are.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I'm feeling it right now. I may as well talk about it.
Well, we appreciate it. It was really great.
Thank you.